Welcome back, warriors, where war never ends and sanity never lasts. Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and brace yourselves, because from here on out, there is only war. Let's go. You know what phrase indicates that you're a weak, feeble human being? I can fix her right there. That's the kind of attitude that shows you're a coward. Some Reddit tier gentleman crap is what it is. You're really going to go up to a dark elf lady and go, yeah, I can fix that. No, you aren't. You're not fixing anything today. And what we're not fixing today for this video is Morathi, the mother of the Droid, mother of Malekith, evil sorceress, older than almost everyone else in the setting, and tall hot lady, very tall hot lady. She's been a Slash cultist, an action leader, a goddess, and more. And overall, she's a pretty horrible person in pretty much every way you can imagine. And you know what the right attitude to take when discussing her is? It's not, I can fix her. That is not why I'm here today. The attitude I'm bringing to the table now is simple. I'm going to talk about Morathi, her lore, her tabletop, and how she can make me worse. You hear me loud and clear out there, everyone. I'm not here to discuss why she's a horrible person. I'm here to get stepped on, sit down, shut up, and listen to the worst lore video you ever going to watch in your life. And now let's take a deep dive into the woman who may be this way. Morathi, the one and only dark elf queen of treachery, deceit, and MILF energy. Now then, let's continue being down horrible Morathi. Long ago, she was once nothing particularly special among the elves. She's so goddamn old that she was alive when the elves were all one faction and the great catastrophe hadn't occurred yet, meaning the elves' existence up to now had been chilling out on all one and nothing else. No demons, no millennial along civil war. They weren't even aware of the dwarfs yet. She did, however, have two things to set her apart. She was beautiful beyond compare, even back then, and since she was 11 years old, she kept receiving visions of worldwide doom and destruction. For whatever reason, she could foresee the old one's gates at the poles erupting into chaos. Demons. No one believed her though, despite the fact she did everything in her power to convince the elves of the coming danger. In her mind, it was because she thought the elves were so content and complacent in their paradise world the old ones were creating for them that they just couldn't comprehend things going so wrong. Personally, I think it's just because her only argument was to go, look how hot I am, to convince people that the world was ending, when your best defense against a counter argument is to go, look how great my tits are. You probably aren't winning the hearts and minds of the people, at least not in the way you want. Well, turns out she was absolutely right, because those gates exploded and demons were everywhere. Old ones, peace out, Lisanne, go into full panic mode and wage a world war to stop them. And the elves, for their part, also tried to fight with much less initial success. About the only fellas to do anything with any amount of success were Sea or Dragon Tamer, a wizard so powerful he could give Taz a run for his money. And an Arion in particular is important because he had just lost his wife and kids to chaos. His kids lived, as it turns out, but he didn't know that. And in his grief, he and Morathi comforted each other in the dark times of the Great Catastrophe, by which I, of course, mean absolutely ball-busting sex. She also brewed them sleeping potions because the Great Catastrophe was a sort of thing that gave every boss PD before the trauma was even finished, which is actually kind of heartwarming. All was not well for the couple, however, in case the fact that it only came about because Aneurin was grieving over the received death of his family didn't clue you in. Morathi, for her part, did come to truly love Aneurin. Aneurin, however, was, shall we say, a bit more reserved on that front. He had a number of reservations about her, even disregarding that, chiefly among them being he felt she was looking into their chaotic enemies just a wee bit too closely. He acknowledged that she was hot as all hell, but unlike almost everyone else alive at this point, that's about all he cared to say on the matter. He wasn't hypnotized by her beauty. He just kind of acknowledged it. The same could be said for the temper she had. Anarion was the sort of guy who fought a dozen greater demons before it was noon, so Morathi's status as a sorceress who would occasionally fly into a blinding rage was at most slightly concerning as far as the safety went. That's part of what drew her towards him, since he was the only one who wouldn't leave the room as soon as possible when she started throwing a magical hissy fit. Despite everything she had going for her though, there was a little issue of her being a bit too interested in dark magic, like I said, and an Arian's true love was his previous life. Hysterial is really just a shoulder for him to cry on. And you know how the rest of that saying goes. I'm sure towards the end then, he realized that Morathi was ultimately an enemy. Everything he knew and loved. He nearly struck her down when he left her for the final time, and it was a very nearly thing. The only true positive he felt came out of their relationship was their son, Malekith, and who, boy, isn't that a loaded sentence. What also didn't help matters was that Kador, and Arian's best buddy, also didn't trust Morathi in the slightest, and was very clear about his stance on the matter. As he was leaving for his final battle, Morathi told Aneurin that she loved him, but he didn't reply. Do keep this moment in mind, because it's probably the last time Morathi is pathetic in a way that isn't just pathetic. After he plopped the Sword of Sea back in its altar and cursed his bloodline forever. She looked all across all one for him, but on account of him being dead, never found an Arijan. After that whole business with the world nearly ending was concluded, Morathi proved every single person who thought ill of her right by founding the cults of pleasure. She also tried to subtly guide her son Malak towards the Phoenix throne because she figured she might as well hedge her bets with being in charge of everyone. She gifted him nice things like a fancy bow and helped him along in his quests, and when Malekith was turned down in favor of Belshazzar becoming the Phoenix King, she was more upset about the manner than he was. She plotted all the while, and things came to a head when Malekith returned from his ventures across the world and was put in charge of dealing with the cults of pleasure. This ended up being a bit awkward when Malekith started purging the cults of pleasure and, one fateful day, found out that his mother was the one in charge of him. Malek debated killing Mommy Deus then and there, but she promised him the full support of the pleasure cults and giving him the Phoenix throne in exchange for her life. After a few days of fierce fighting and deliberation, he decided he'd side with her. Unfortunately for all the cutting and those to have by modern Warhammer fantasy, it would appear all of that was gained over the course of the 1,000 years they'd been alive and away from Orwan, because their initial plan to put Malekith on the Phoenix throne was taken straight from the playbook of a 12-year-old playing Among Us. Malekith assembled the elven princes and loudly announced that Belshazzar was a traitor and member of the pleasure cults, and the evidence he and Morathi had for this brilliant scheme. Trust me bro, I'm Malekith. To the shock of no one but Malekith and Morathi, no one believed him, so they went for plan B, which involved Malekith walking into the flame of Assyrian and killing all the princes. Malekith was deep fried, a lot of the high elf princes died, and Morathi dragged her crispy bacon son to relative safety for a little while. They waged war against the loyalist elves, and when it looked like they were losing, she tried to undo the magical vortex. It worked, and then, when that unleashed all the elves trapped inside of the vortex, it unworked. Morathi got a rogue blacksmith of old to make Malekith his discount Darth Vader armor, and then they fled to Nagaro. Now Morat's activities between then and the 10,000 years later of modern Warhammer fantasy are varied, but also pretty much the same thing every time the specifics change. But overall she fell into a pretty predictable pattern. Her and Malekith would plot against each other, it wouldn't work, they'd kinda make up, and then invade Orwan. Imagine that, but stretched out over a 10,000 year period. And that's about what she got up to. One time, she killed a love interest Malekith had because she was afraid she would make Malekith a nicer people. Arson all around, and he wasn't happy with that one in particular. She also dual tech list during the most brutal of the Dark Elf invasions at the Battle of Fin Ophel Plain on Owen, but despite her being a monstrous mage from prehistory, Tease is Taz, and therefore won by default, as we know from the novel Sons of Elyon. At one point she talked to Kalidor again, and they had a nice pissing contest where Morathi called him a frail shadow of his former self. To be fair to her, he did look like a skeleton when they were talking, so I don't blame her for thinking that. One of the reasons she wanted to destroy the world with the vortex was because Kalidor didn't want it destroyed, which is petty beyond mortal comprehension. This was then eventually followed by Cal revealing he's not actually a desiccated corpse of an elf, but still firmly in his prime, and Morathi was sent packing. Officially, she's one of the chief priestesses of Cain, presiding over his cult. She uses her status as the chief hag priestess to bathe in a cauldron of blood, which keeps her youthful appearance because of magical reasons that probably make sense if you're a dark elf. Unofficially, at least in older lore, she's also back on the grind of being the head of the pleasure cults as well, which she reformed into the dark elves. Land elves in fantasy aren't like the Elder in 40k, and there's nothing stopping them from worshipping Slash, aside from it being a bad idea in general. Sure, Slash does still prefer elven souls above all others, but she doesn't instantly consume them like over in 40k. She would frequently be seen surrounded by demon edit parties, and those parties usually had a 100% mortality rate for people who weren't named Morathi. In newer lore, she was ICON to being an important figure in the worship of the elven goddess Authority, their own goddess of pleasure. This is because GW started treating the elves like the Elder and decided they're all horrified of Slok in the exact same way. She's also a firm worshipper of the goddess Arti, Arti's sister, and the goddess of dark magic. This is both because she's a sorceress and naturally wants to get that sweet god magic, and because the two divine sisters don't like each other and like to snipe each other's followers. It's equal part worship and hedging her bets. Another difference between the old lore and new lore is that whole business with Malekith. You know, the business, the mother of all what Upa's complex business. That was moved away from as time went on in fantasy. Whether or not you choose to believe the older or newer lore on exactly how close Marathon or Sunwar is, up to you. But I choose to believe the newer lore because it makes it slightly less gross when I say that I want to drown between Morathi's legs. I have accepted that I am not getting full monetization on this video. As a general rule of thumb, Morathi is responsible for all aspects of dark elf culture that Malekith isn't, and she probably had a hand in those too. For instance, while Malekith instituted Cain as their chief god, Morathi is the leader of the cult of Cain, and thus the one who handles the specifics. It makes it very fun when they decide they want the other dead, because one of them is the undisputed Cain, and the other one is the one who people have to most often directly deal with. Usually it involves every assassin one sends after the other horribly dead, and a stern talking to from Malekith to Morathi that she better cut the crap she does for a few dozen years, then tries to kill him again. Sometimes she gets exiled and then she comes back, repeat ad nauseum. Despite her maybe not SES worship, she has acted against the Chaos worshippers to the north of the Dark Elves territory. She seduced them to her side, fought them tooth and nail, and generally is as much a pain in their ass as she is for the High Elves. There was one instance where she built them a massive palace of their own and give them absurd amounts of wealth to convince them to pledge loyalty to her and Malakith. If you're mostly a 40k fan and think it sounds odd that Coast followers would work with non-Coast folk, remember that the Norkin, as often as not, just want to survive, and any source of glory is good enough for them. Serving the Dark Elves in battle will get Khorne as blood and skulls just as well as fighting for only Khorne, and Morathi knows damn well that's the case. Compared to Malakith, she's a lot sneakier with her schemes like this, willing to do more than bash people's brains in to get what she wants. That's not to say that Malakith can't be cunning, and the Morathi can't use brute force when need be. They've just got their preferences for how to get things done. And the last thing before we move on to the end times is one final difference between older lore and newer lore. Much like her relationship with her son has changed, so has her general mentality, and I mean that very literally, because as Warhammer reached its 8th edition, she was given dementia. She occasionally thinks she's still in an Aryan's time and will look for her husband desperately. And it's just sad. In the end times, it only gets worse. Elven civil war comes to a head, and when Tyrion pulls the sword of Cain, she goes fully insane and thinks he's an Aryan reborn, as Tass is trying to bind the winds of magic to the incarnates. Morathi also is the one who really screws the pooch, John that messes up that ritual. She once again completely unbinds the vortex in Doomswell 1, and takes down a number of the mages trapped inside who are keeping it going. Good old Kalor Dragon Temer gets the last laugh though, because as Sesh begins to enter the material plane, he gives Morathi one final middle finger, as the ritual was coming to an abrupt end. Morathi tried to flee on account of not wanting to get slashed. Then Khalidok comes in with the people's elbow and drags Morathi into Caesar's Maul with Hugduman. No, he didn't actually use a wrestling move, but come on. Tell me the mental image doesn't make it better. And at least as far as I'm concerned, that's the most important bit of Morathi in the end times. She pushed Tyrion to be even crazier. And she got killed in terms of what she actually did not much, but in terms of the ramifications. I can comfortably say she ruined almost everything. Oh, as she was also revealed to be the mortal incarnation of Hikari. You would think that would mean something, but much like almost every plot point in the end times, it doesn't. But we're not done with the Demi Droy Momi yet, because she comes back in Age of Sigmar. Somehow Morathi returns in Anbu, the realm of shadow, for a while. She was alone with nothing but beings of pure shadow she created with her magic, until eventually she found Malakith, who I will not refer to as Malarian, because I simply do not care for the name change. Unlike her, Malakith was now a true god, as Raron and tease. Rather understandably, this made her a bit upset. Not that she really deserves godhood, but I get the frustration. She did, however, have one thing going for her, the key to accessing Sesh, to steal away the devoured elven souls in her stomach. She may not be a Gin, but she still got some leverage. And more to the point, a reason for the other 3 elven deities not to end her life. They split the souls amongst themselves to try and recreate the elves of old with, and naturally Morathi, around with the ritual. I'm sure she got slightly more than the others did. Coupled with this was her getting quite the lucky break when she came into contact with C's heart, and she did not let that gift go to waste. She assembled together the Daughters of Cain faction, dedicated to restoring Cain to his former glory via worship of the dead god. Once again, however, she was being the sneakiest git in the mortal realms, because she was siphoning the power that would otherwise resurrect him into herself. That's not all she did though. Of course, she tried to seduce the other gods and get into their good graces because, hey, she's still hot as hell, and it always worked before. Unfortunately for her, the only choices as far as gods go weren't great, so she never had much success. There's Tyrion and Tease who hate her, Malakith, who only hates her slightly less than he used to, Sigmar, who couldn't care less about Morathi if he tried, Ariel, who also hates her and probably have her crucified on magical branches, the dwarf gods, who almost certainly also hate her for what she did to their kin in the old world, Gorama Mara, who you cannot seduce because he's the Orc god and probably doesn't even understand sex, and last but not least, Nagash. She tried to seduce Nagash, who is A, a skeleton, and B, taller than a Wraith Knight. Not only did this not work, because of course it didn't, Nagash backhanded her so goddamn hard that her true form as a monstrous half-snake creature was revealed. After this, she was forced to contend with the fact that in Age of Sigmar, she could no longer sleep her way to power and influence. For a while, she was being pretty lowy with everything, quietly siphoning powerment for Cain. But one day she decided she would act decisively. She dealt with the ID in it to get a lantern from them that would allow her to enter Slesh again, which incidentally they stole from Tease when they ran away from him. She entered Slesh not just to get more souls, but specifically to steal the power of the previous Phoenix King Sesh had inside of her. Each of them had a bit of Assyrian power within them, which coincidentally also means that Malakith, being the one true Phoenix King, has been retconned. Thank God. When she reached the last and first one, an area Yin, she paused. Even after countless eons in the end of the world, she still held some small bit of love for him. But do you remember how he didn't say he loved her back at the end? Absence did not make his heart grow fond, and he cut her soul in two. Because of this, Morathi's attempted godhood both did and didn't work. On the plus side, she was now a full goddess. Good for her. On the downside, there's a whole lot of crap she has to deal with now because of it. The first thing she did upon reaching godhood was annexing the city of Anvilgard from under Sigmar's nose. She had the excuse of the fact it was going to be crushed by orcs in a rampaging destruction god without her intervention. But this, coupled with the fact she's now a full god, means Sigmar and the rest are going to be watching her like a hawk. And now, instead of being able to choose between looking like the hottest elf ever or the hottest snake monsters ever, she's now one being with two bodies. The elf version is Morathi Kane and the snake lady is now the Shadow Queen. The Shadow Queen seems to have gotten a bit more of Kane's influence than she would have liked. The god Kagos whooped her ass during the whole Anvilgard business, and she's on the warpath to rematch them in spite of the fact she'll probably still get bodied. And Mirana's having issues reigning, and it's looking more and more likely that the Shadow Queen half of Morathi is going to be causing some diplomatic issues in the future. And despite now becoming a proper god, Sigmar still deems her beneath his notice, which pisses her off to no end. Instead of dealing with her himself, he sent the Celeste and Prime to do it. She was unhappy with the implication of still not being worth his time, but they disappeared into a room for a while, and when they came out, Morathi was allowed to have Anvilgard in exchange for all the Stormcast within the city. She renamed the city Har-Quran, and is contending with the fact that everyone inside of it would rather her not be in charge. Interestingly enough, the dwarf god Gromi of all people told the Celeste and Prime to just let her have the damn city. Like I said before, never would have thought he cared for her in the slightest. Maybe she should have tried her Lou getting into his pants. The problems don't end there either. Her daughters of Can are having a bit of a religious schism at the moment, with many of them being appalled and angry over the fact Morathi lied about their whole religion, or rather, the fact that she lied about using the power she was stealing to resurrect Cain. The divide between those loyal to her and those who aren't is becoming more and more divisive as time goes on. She also had a nice little chat with Malekith, who criticized her for blundering into godhood in a way that managed to piss off pretty much every action in the setting. She told him he couldn't talk down to her and cut off his fingers, but he's made of shadow, so it didn't really do much to him. When she told him about Tyrion moving against him, Malekith informed her he was well aware and was taking steps to counter the god of Heesh, which impressed her a bit and made her regard her son just a little bit more fondly. Not much, but hey, they aren't trying to kill each other anymore, and they're sort of working together, so it's an improvement from fantasy. She leaves the conversation by going to crush a revolt against her and Evilgard and basking in the glory of her newfound divinity. Oh, when Nash attacked her with Nihad because he thinks that the soul she used to ascend to godhood belonged to him, but that's a non-statement. That's his standard operating procedure. Me telling you Nagash is complaining about people not handing their souls to him is the same as me telling you water is wet. I'm assuming you knew that already. Now looking back on the script, I'm worried I might have taken the piss out of Morathi just a bit too much, and to be fair, she failed to successfully put Malv on the front of Alwan. Failed to retake Alwan over the course of 10,000 years. Wasn't even a god like almost every other returning elf character in AOS. And when she did finally become a god, it was impossibly the most offensive way she could have done it. So let's just clear the water on this. Morathi is monstrously competent and monstrously dangerous. She is one of the strongest mages in all of Warhammer, only really being beaten out by the Sloane, Tease, and Ash. Her being basically immortal in fantasy, and now actually immortal in AOS, means that she can spend centuries plotting for a single thing, and almost no one will see it coming until they have to deal with the aftermath of it. She consorts with Case and has always gotten away with it, and quite frankly, that's probably the ultimate testament to how capable and frightening she can be. Celeste demons, especially out of every demon out there, will do their best to make sure you regret dealing with them, and Morathi has never had to face those consequences. Unless your name is Ulthan Nara, you would do well to be deathly afraid of what this woman can do, because she can either have a network of spies spanning the entire world blackbag you, or send your very soul to the depths of hell herself. To reinforce this, let's look at how monstrous Elf can be in Age of Sigmar for Lord Positives. Z. Morathi, she's a cunning sorceress who's held her ground for 10,000 years in Warhammer Fantasy, and managed to survive being eaten by Slock. She's crawled her way to godhood, inch by agonizing inch, and hasn't let anything stand in her way. If you want a character that not only has the strength of will to face the most daunting of challenges, but the cunning and power to do so in a variety of ways, you want her. She's of course also a pick for you if you want a faction leader to be in your army. She founded and leads the Daughters of Cain. And more to the point, she's a goddess now, which is another thing going for her from a lore standpoint. That leads into a couple positives actually. She's shown growth in ways beyond just character growth. Seeing a character grow and change is always nice, but failing that, seeing them grow physically can be just as cool. And there's no upgrade quite like reaching divinity if you like returning.